This painting of Washington crossing the Delaware depicts a famous moment in U.S. history, and it has some inaccuracies. Here are the 10 things wrong with this picture. I'm Bob Summers, and this is a presidential story. The Continental Army needed a decisive victory to bolster sagging morale and encourage more volunteers to join the revolution. On Christmas night, 1776, in a bold and risky attack against the Hessian garrison in Trenton, New Jersey, General George Washington crossed the frozen Delaware River. Washington's goal was to earn a quick victory over the Hessians, who had been celebrating the Christmas holiday. Washington's plan was originally to include 3 different groups crossing the Delaware River. The first crossing was to lead 1,800 troops to Burlington, New Jersey, to prevent other British and Hessian troops from racing to Trenton to support the garrison there. The second group of 800 troops would cross at Trenton and take up defensive positions to prevent the Hessian retreat. The third group of 2,400 soldiers, led by General Washington himself, would cross 10 miles north of Trenton and then march into Trenton to surprise the Hessians at dawn on December 26th. The Continental Army had plenty of boats, thanks to General Washington's foresight. Earlier, the New Jersey militia had brought all available watercraft to the southern shore of the Delaware River. Most of Washington's forces would cross in 40 to 60 foot long, shallow draft Durham boats, strongly built cargo vessels designed to move iron ore and bulk goods. These boats had high sidewalls and were strong enough to survive in the ice-filled Delaware. Even with the high walls, the bottoms of the Durham boats would fill with water, meaning most soldiers would stand during the crossing. The horses and heavy artillery would be transported on large, flat-bottomed ferries. The weather conditions that night were terrible. Temperatures ranged between 29 and 33 degrees Fahrenheit. There was already a lot of ice floating in the river. To add to that, as they were crossing, the driving rain of a nor'easter turned into freezing sleet and snow. The first 2 crossings failed when they were unable to cross the ice-choked river. Aided by wires strung across the river, Washington's forces managed to cross the Delaware at a spot less than 300 yards wide, but they were still 3 hours delayed. After crossing, Washington's tired, hungry, and cold army faced a 10-mile march to Trenton. Washington contemplated aborting the attack. When remembering this fateful moment, he later wrote, "As I was certain there was no making a retreat without being discovered and harassed on repassing the river, I determined to push on at all events." After marching for 4 hours, Washington maintained the element of surprise and outflanked the Hessians. Hessian Colonel Johann Rall was mortally wounded. Without their leader, the Hessians were confused and disoriented. Eventually they surrendered, and Washington had the major victory the Americans needed. The major surprise was that the Hessians knew the attack was coming and did nothing to prevent it. A British spy within Washington's headquarters, who has never been identified, passed word to the British, who passed it to the Hessians. Colonel Rall dismissed the threat, saying, "Let them come." The day before the attack, Rall received 2 American deserters, who also informed him of the imminent attack. With this intelligence, how were the Hessians surprised? Apparently, a series of false alarms and the growing storm had given the Hessian defenders a sense that no attack was likely that night. Over 70 years later, painter Emanuel Leutze, who had been born in Germany, raised as a child in America, and returned as an adult to Germany, thought the example of the underdog American revolutionaries would inspire Europeans, especially Germans, toward more reforms during the revolutions of 1848. The revolutions of 1848 were widespread domestic uprisings that started in Italy and spread throughout Europe for almost 2 years. These uncoordinated revolutions impacted over 50 countries, including France, the Netherlands, Austria, Italy, and Lutz's Germany. There were actually 3 versions of Washington crossing the Delaware. One thing people do not realize if they have not seen the painting in person is just how massive it is. The first two paintings were each over 12 feet tall and over 21 feet wide. The first painting was completed in Dusseldorf, Germany in 1850, and just after it was completed, this version was damaged by a fire in Leutze's studio. After Leutze restored it, it was sold to the Künstler Bremen Art Museum. On September 5, 1942, during World War II, the painting was completely destroyed in a British bombing raid. Leutze began painting a full-sized replica of the first version in 1850. By October 1851, the painting had been completed, sold for $10,000, or the equivalent of $400,000 today, and placed in an exhibition in New York City to rave reviews. The New York Evening Mirror boldly called it the grandest, most majestic, and most effective painting ever exhibited in America. After changing ownership several times, it was finally donated to New York's Metropolitan Museum of Art by businessman and philanthropist John Stuart Kennedy in 1897. The simple frame that had been with the painting for over 90 years turned out not to be the original frame that Leutze designed. A photograph taken by Matthew Brady in 1864 was found in the New York Historical Society in 2007, showing the painting in a spectacular eagle-crested frame. A replica frame with a 14-foot wide eagle was carved using that photo as a reference. The third version was much smaller, at 3.3 feet by 5.7 feet. It hung in the White House receiving room from 1979 until 2014. After being displayed in the Minnesota Marine Art Museum in Winona, Minnesota, it was sold at auction in 2022 for $45 million. Leutze went to great lengths to make his portrait historically accurate, even using American models. But his efforts still resulted in many inaccuracies. Number 1. Time of day. In order to avoid detection, Washington's crossing happened near midnight. There may have been some torches for light, but there would have been no sunlight, as the sun would not yet have risen. Number 2. The weather. It was not a clear day. During the crossing, there were heavy winds and snow, making for low visibility. Number 3. Icebergs. The danger was real. There was ice atop the river, but not the large icebergs shown in the painting. Number 4. The boat. The smaller boats in the painting reinforce the image of the underdog, a small ragtag group of soldiers crossing a mighty river in tiny rowboats. However, the truth is the Continental Army crossed in 40 to 60 foot long and 8 foot wide Durham boats used for large cargo deliveries. They also had other large ferries for the horses and cannons, which would not have fit in the boats depicted in the painting. Number 5. Washington's pose. Washington's heroic pose is powerful and inspiring, but also not practical. First, it would have been hard to maintain that stance in the choppy water and heavy winds that night. It is likely he would have fallen overboard and drowned. Second, because he is in a small rowboat, that stance risked capsizing the small vessel. However, he would have been standing. In fact, everyone was probably standing to avoid the icy water collecting in the bottom of the Durham boats. Number 6. Washington's age. Washington appears as the presidential image we have come to know. But at the time of the crossing, Washington was a much younger 44 years old, not the graying man from his presidency. Number 7. The flag. The flag in the painting is an early version of the Stars and Stripes U.S. flag. This flag's design was first specified 6 months after the Delaware crossing in the flag resolution of the Second Continental Congress. It flew for the first time 3 months after that. The historically accurate flag would have been the Grand Union flag. This first national flag and the standard of the Continental Army was first raised in January 1776. Number 8. James Monroe. According to the 1853 exhibition catalog, the man standing next to Washington and holding the American flag is Lieutenant James Monroe. The future U.S. president fought at the Battle of Trenton, even sustaining a severe wound when a musket ball damaged an artery in his shoulder. However, Monroe was with a small group that had crossed the Delaware earlier to scout the route to Trenton that would be used once Washington's forces had crossed. Number 9. The river's width. Washington crossed at a narrow point of the river, less than 300 yards. The river shown is much larger to depict a greater challenge for the heroes to overcome. Number 10. The cables. In order to facilitate a safer and easier crossing, cables were strung between the two shores and affixed to the boats. They were aligned in such a way that the natural current would carry the boats across. So what would a more accurate version of Washington's crossing of the Delaware look like? Luckily, we don't have to imagine. In 2011, American painter Mort Künstler took on the challenge of a reimagined and more historically accurate Leutze painting. After visiting the site of the crossing and speaking with many historians, this was Künstler's interpretation. The scene is at night during a snowstorm. The icebergs were replaced with ice sheets. The rowboats have been replaced with flat cargo boats to carry horses, which can be seen in the back, cannons, and a lot of troops. Washington is posed safely next to a secured cannon, and the guide wire has been added. Künstler gave Leutze a lot of credit, though. From all the way over in Germany and over 70 years later, he could not have been expected to get all the details right. Even without the internet for research, Leutze did get some things right, like General Washington's uniform. It's hard to say the rest is wrong. Ultimately, art is not about the facts. It is meant to elicit emotion. This painting's intent was to motivate Germans to action, and it did that. Even today, it stirs pride in Americans around their revolutionary history. So, in the end, maybe it doesn't even matter. Thanks for watching. If this video made you want to paint a picture, please help out the channel, like and subscribe. And please visit POTUS.com to learn more interesting facts about the presidents.